Sabaidi Najong, welcome back, Sabscribers. It's your girl Sab here again with another episode of Suffering of Silence. It's been a long time since I've sat down and made an episode. It is the month of September. It is Suicide Awareness Month, so it is very important to me, at least, that I sit down and make an episode to talk to you guys a little bit more about how we can raise awareness on the resources that we do have available to those who experience a lot of thoughts and tendencies of suicide, and just to ensure that we can change the narrative of how we approach these conversations. Of course, that is the purpose of what Suffering of Silence is. So fair warning now that today's episode will discuss thoughts of suicide, and I want to ensure that there's a trigger warning. So before I get into all the personal experiences and things like that, I want to make sure that I provide the resources and information to you who might need it, whether it's you or someone that you love. There is a suicide and crisis hotline that you can either call, text, or chat. All you have to do is call or text 988 to speak to someone at the suicide and crisis hotline. There is also a chat, of course. It is chat.988lifeline.org. And you can also go to the website that they have. It is 988lifeline.org to find different resources on how you can contribute to raising awareness on those who have suicidal thoughts and tendencies. And there's tons of different ways that you can advocate for it. September 10th is actually World Suicide Prevention Day. So we try to honor those we have lost due to suicide. And we also try to ensure that, again, we talk more about it, because I feel that personally, a lot of mental illnesses or a lot of things that we go through internally are truly unspoken on, and that can obviously spiral into very dark and awful places. And so I always am one to speak out on these things because I know where it can lead you. I've seen it personally. I've experienced it personally. I also want to bring to everyone's attention that there are ways that you can get involved even if you don't need these resources personally for yourself. Try to find ways that you can volunteer or work for this organization. And something that I learned as I was surfing through their website was that there isn't even a location in the greater Milwaukee area. I was very shocked to find that Milwaukee does not have a suicide and crisis hotline location here in our area. We are the most populated city in the state of Wisconsin, but we also experience a multitude of things in our city because it is a metropolitan area. And where I grew up, I know that it's definitely something that's needed. I know that it's something that is important that we talk more about. I've grown up in communities that mental health hasn't always been deemed a priority. And this would be a perfect segue for me to kind of discuss some of my experiences with suicide. I could start with my earliest experience with suicide was when I was about 9. I don't want to speak too much on it because it wasn't necessarily my experience to talk about. My siblings do not share the same mother as I do. I do have siblings that don't share the same father as me either. My siblings who have a different mother than me actually were affected by suicide. Their mother actually lost her life to suicide, and that happened when I was about 9. And again, I don't like to speak too heavily on it because that is not my story to share, but I can speak from my own perspective of how it affected me. And a lot of the relationship between our parents weren't necessarily like the strongest. Let's just say the relationship that our parents had was volatile, to say the least. And a majority of the time, they could not stand being in the same room as each other. Growing up in a blended family, I was always it's always conflicting because we're so used to hearing the narrative of, exes and parents, step-parents and whatever not getting along. And that was very much the case I believe with my family at least. And it was so toxic. But I am grateful that I was still able to kind of form my own opinion of some of the other adults and parents in our situation. So I am grateful for that. And I would say my personal experiences with her, she was kind to me, at least. And it was never like an awkward or terrible interaction with her. I'll be honest, right? I don't speak highly of people even when they're gone, unless I really only have good things to say about them. Because even when I talk about my own dad, like, I'm honest about the way things were growing up with him. Like, yeah, I love my dad. And of course, I think my dad is a great father. He did everything he could. He did the best he could. Of course, I believe that my father did the best he could. But I would never downplay the abusive and toxic behaviors that I had growing up. And so when I speak on my perspective of my sibling's mother, I speak to what I know. And what I know is that she was always very kind to me, and she never treated me any differently because I was my father's child. My experiences with her have always been great experiences. And I obviously love my siblings a lot. I love my siblings very much. So my sister and I are 5 years apart. So when I was 9, she was 14. She was just starting high school. And my sister and I, we got the chance to like really grow up pretty closely compared to how I've grown up with like my other siblings, because we were the youngest. I love my sister so much. And watching her experience this loss was like, even at 9, my heart broke so much. There is nothing worse than what she had to experience. And again, I don't want to get too much into the details of it, but just as I watched her grieve her mother, I could not hold it. I couldn't do anything but cry for her. And it's not because I felt sorry for her. It was just like, I hate to see my sister be so heartbroken. And that was truly an impactful moment for me. I had to watch my entire family grieve it. And even through all the conflicts with our parents, you know, I'm grateful that my parents allowed me to really like be there and support my siblings the way that I did. It was truly like life-changing. My sister had to move in with us, and just watching her go through that was so hard. And that's also what made me love my sister more. Kind of seeing her experience that and like persevere through it is what makes me love her so much more as a person. So my own personal experiences with suicide and thoughts of suicide and times that I've acted on my thoughts started as early as like 11 or 12. Not many people know, but I had institutionalized because of my suicidal thoughts and tendencies. And all I can really explain is, I can't explain much because a lot of it has kind of become a blur for me. But growing up, I always felt very alone and isolated, and I felt very much out of place and just never belonging anywhere. And I think a lot of that affected me very early on, and I obviously didn't know how to like express that. I didn't know how to communicate that as a kid. Seeing how my siblings all had siblings and I didn't, and always feeling that I would get left with less of a childhood than most. It made me feel very alone. It made me feel very just never belonging to anywhere. I think it really started to affect me enough to where I acted on my thoughts of harming myself and wanting to no longer exist. I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding why. Physically, my life seemed perfect, seemed like everything was going well. Do you remember one day after I was institutionalized and my sister realized that I was harming myself? She talked to me and she told me, like, not that she was trying to like guilt me out of it, but she was just trying to use it as an example. She wouldn't want to see me lose my life just to a fight with suicide as she had to see with her mother. So having these conversations with my sister probably is what saved me from going down a really dark and awful path. At a very young age, I understood the impact that suicide puts on a family. But in those moments, like, I didn't care. I was just in my own space, my own head, and I was just trying to relieve myself of my loneliness and my pain and my own suffering, right? And the day that I was institutionalized actually was like New Year's Eve. Growing up with parents who were never on the same page about how they wanted to raise us really caused a lot of turmoil within me personally, I'd say. And I see it vividly happening very often. I see it actually happening with my nephews and my nieces, and how a pattern continues to cycle on. And I give a lot of this background information because I think it makes a difference in understanding why and breaking down my suicidal thoughts and tendencies at such an early age. It's extremely scary to think about how something just as simple as how you choose to raise your child can make all the difference in the world for their mental health. I think that's what scares me the most about having kids, or the thought of having kids, is not being on the same page as my partner in co-parenting. And I feel that a lot of that, I unfortunately had to pay a lot of the price for the lack of communication and the lack of co-parenting skills that my parents had. And I totally give them grace and understand that they did everything that they could. They did the best they could with what they knew. I reflect back on those days, I realize more and more that I'm not to blame, because I would blame myself often. I'd blame myself for fights. I'd blame myself for arguments. I'd blame myself for not being the perfect daughter for my parents. And that stuff used to eat me up inside. And it got to the point where I had wanted to just throw myself in front of a moving car. For my dad, at least, that was kind of his wake-up call, I feel like, for him to check me into a mental institution to get the help that I needed, right? And being there, I was there for like 3 days. It was so strange. It was so interesting. It's just the way that you would imagine it. I got there really late. I had a roommate, and they make you change into these clothes, and they make you sleep in a cold bed. You can't have a radio. You can't have anything while you're in bed. And I woke up the next day and I went out to the common area where we kind of have our group interactive moments. And the more I would talk to these other kids and the more I would spend time with these other kids, it really put into perspective for me that, wow, like, my issues aren't even real issues. Like, my issues, my mental health was not as serious as what was going on for these kids. Like, there were kids in there that were throwing microwaves at their boyfriends and their parents. Being in that mental institution made me realize that even if I don't have a lot of people who care about me and my mental health, I can consciously make these decisions and know that this isn't right for me. Like how people say they send you to jail to kind of learn your lesson so that you stop doing what you're doing. You stop committing crimes because you don't want to keep ending up there. So that's kind of like how I was feeling while I was there. Was like, I mean, I'm not comparing a mental institution for teens to jail or anything. But when I was in there, I'm like, I do not want to do anything that will get me remotely close back to this place, because this place is scary. This place is for real life problems. And me, I don't have real life problems. And I believed that for so long. And when I got discharged, I was supposed to be going to therapy. I went to one therapy session and never went back again. I felt like, oh, therapy is not for me. I don't think that there's anything really wrong with me. I think that there's people with actual problems that can actually use these resources. And that was all like before high school. And I feel like throughout high school, throughout high school, I did experience a lot of friends or people close to me in my life that were battling with suicidal thoughts and tendencies. And I remember once, my freshman year, I was sitting on the phone with a friend who was extremely terrified. She wanted to take her own life. And I actually ended up becoming close with some of these people due to the experience that we had. And we sat there trying to convince her otherwise and just trying to listen to her, trying to talk her out of how she's feeling. Although that situation brought me closer to my friends, it was unfortunate that it had to be that brought us all closer, but it made me kind of understand more that we may not have enough resources out here, and we may not have an understanding of what we can do or where we can go with these thoughts. And so I know I become much more reckless with my life sometimes, and I'm more inclined to doing things that are risky. But, as I got older, I continued to deal with my suicidal thoughts and tendencies. And I think another very impactful moment for me in life that involved suicide was towards the end of my abusive relationship with my ex. I had taken a microdose of a microdose, and it made me open up my mind to the fact that my life wasn't over. I still had so much time to still live my life. I still had so much time to achieve the goals that I wanted to achieve. And I didn't need to continue to throw away my life just for this relationship, just for this guy. And it's what really put me in position to wake up to things and let go and move on and build up an escape plan. And eventually, as I'm going through the motions of this relationship still, I remember the time where we had come back home from dinner, and I think I'd said something that bothered me. And at the time I was wearing my glasses, and we were in the kitchen, we're arguing back and forth. And he just takes a huge key ring with a ton of keys on it, and he just chucks it right at me, and it hit me right in the face, and it left me a black eye. And then he starts grabbing hot sauce bottles and throwing them at me, and in my mind I'm ducking, right? And in my mind I'm if I would pick up this knife and hurt myself, you will never. In that moment I just thought to myself wow, the thing I could reach for is a knife. And I could just take my own life and not have to deal with this ever again. I wouldn't even have to come up with a plan on how to escape. I wouldn't even have to deal with what he's doing to me now. But needless to say, I did not act on those thoughts. I did not actually do it. But I'll tell you, I had my hand on that knife, and I was so ready to pull it out. Sometimes when you're in those situations, you don't feel like there's any hope of getting out. Or if you do feel like there's hope to get out, what more are you going to have outside of this anymore? You start to heavily identify yourself as that person that's in an abusive relationship. It took so long for me to wake up to all of it. I ended up creating a playlist, a mental health playlist, and I would listen to it from time to time now, but anytime that we would get into an argument, every time that I felt like I was being gaslit or I just needed to breathe. Because at this point, everything started to bother me. Everything started to make me very on edge because I was waking up to everything and I was finally over his shit. So I would play this playlist with my headphones in on full blast just so I could feel normal, just so I could block out those thoughts and not act on them. And I can't tell you how many times I would just imagine myself taking my own life so I wouldn't have to deal with this. Because I didn't know if I could safely make it out of this situation. I didn't know if I could ensure that my family would be safe from all of this if I were to leave him. And I just remember putting this playlist on and just immediately crying, tears just running down my eyes, and I couldn't care anymore. I was losing, I saw losing myself every time I played this song, every time I had those thoughts of wanting to kill myself, wanting to hurt myself, wanting to just end it all. And those experiences also made me change the way I listen to music and how I experience music as well. For example, it's Good Days by SZA. To me, when I listen to that song, I'm picturing a different version of myself on a good day. And that person lived somewhere within my mind, and I just needed to dig a little further for it. So that was probably, that was some of the last very impactful suicidal thoughts that I had. And I feel like within the last 2 years, since I've been working on this healing experience and journey for myself, the thoughts of wanting to harm myself have not been as much. it hasn't been as prominent. It hasn't been as important in my mind. And I thought I could get to this place, and I'm very grateful to have gotten to this point. But it took a lot. It took a long fight. It took a long battle to really even start with wanting to get better. And even starting with wanting to get better, you still need to work on figuring out how you can get better. And I'm so grateful for just where I've gone with everything. So I want to again make sure that I emphasize on the fact that there are resources out there for you. I'm a resource. I am someone who will sit there and listen. If you just need someone to talk to or you just need to vent, I am here. You can hit my DMs at Suffering of Silence Pod on TikTok or Instagram. And if you want even more of an unbiased opinion of things, just make sure you contact the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988, and that's through call or text. Or you can also go and chat with them at chat.988lifeline.org. And also check out their website to see what resources you can find there. I've ordered me quite a few things, like some stickers, notes, poster boards. It will bring more awareness to what the movement is over at 988. And I hope that some of what I'm doing becomes impactful. So as we continue to finish out the month of September, don't forget to honor those in your lives who have lost their lives to suicide, because suicide is not a joke. And I hope that one day I can actually bring these resources directly to my community and my neighborhood where I grew up. But as for now, I will talk to you guys later. Again, make sure you subscribe to Suffering of Silence wherever you get podcasts, and we're on TikTok and Instagram at Suffering of Silence Pod. I'll talk to you guys soon.